Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to a bit of a shorter video where I'm basically just going to be covering my favorite teams in 3.0. Hi. I want to make this video because I've really been enjoying the patch, and I think there's a few teams that are like the reason why I've enjoyed the patch so much. So I figured it would be a nice idea to just talk about them a little bit. So yeah. The first one is really straightforward. The team is Keqing, Fischl, Kazuha, Dendro MC. You can technically use defensive options instead of Kazuha if you'd like. If you're in an AoE scenario, you can replace your defensive option for Fischl instead. I really like this team. It's been really fun. It's actually a fun Keqing team, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, I've just been enjoying it a lot. You go TF on Keqing, either Thunder Soother or whatever on Fischl, VV on Kazuha. Honestly, kind of whatever on your Dendro main character. And it's actually just a good team. Let's try to get out, yeah. Yeah, it's an actual like pretty good team. I have a Skyward Harp on my Fischl, which is the only 5-star weapon in this team. Skyward Harp is actually about as good as Stringless. I just don't have my Stringless actually leveled all the way, so I'm using Skyward Harp instead. But you get the idea, right? It's a pretty solid team. Keqing plus Kazuha are really good at dealing with AoE. Fischl is really good at dealing with single target. You just end up with solid damage overall. Obviously, this version of the team doesn't have a healer, which makes it more difficult to play, but it's actually pretty good now. Keqing on the Thundering Fury set is actually a lot of fun to play when it doesn't feel like you're not doing any damage. So yeah, I mean, this has been pretty nice. The second team I've been liking a lot is a team that's actually very similar, but instead of using Keqing, you end up using Venti. And then because Kazuha has a 15-second cooldown burst, Fischl 15-second, Venti 15 seconds, I've been actually liking using Cole instead of Dendro main character a bit more because Cole's cooldowns line up better. And what you end up doing is you go Thundering Fury instead of Viridescent Venerer on your Kazuha. Now obviously this is a Venti team, which means that it's not in the ideal scenario against heavy enemies like in 12-1 first half. I'll probably do it one clear here and then I'll do one clear on the other side. And as you can see, right, even if I don't have his constellations, I still get like a pretty low E cooldown. Right, and all that, I kind of fucked it up, shouldn't have used my burst there, but it is what it is, right? Obviously now when you're in single target, your first hit of your E doesn't trigger Aggravate, only the plunge attack does. Forgot to put the pause back down, but yeah. So it's not as good in situations where enemies aren't like groupable with Venti and stuff like that. When you're in situations where where Venti's burst is actually useful. Decided to not hit. Happens, I guess. But yeah, you end up getting like really good damage. And it's actually pretty good. It does pretty well in basically every situation, even though it's no, it doesn't get all of its value when you're in single target, but it's still good in single target, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, I've been enjoying this team a lot as well, and I would recommend giving it a shot if you have the units for it. So the third team I want to talk about is going to be this team, which is a Hyperbloom Sucrose team. You want to build Sucrose with a lot of elemental mastery because you're basically trying to get her to trigger the Hyperblooms. But basically what ends up happening is when you have Electro on the enemy, you can swirl that Electro onto Bloom Seeds to trigger Hyperbloom. And the way specifically that Fischl works with seeds is generally Oz won't hit the seeds. Fischl's Ascension 4 can hit the seeds. The thing is, Fischl's Ascension 4 hits after the Electro Swirl. You can pretty reliably, like it's still gonna happen every once in a while that you get the wrong one, but you can pretty reliably make sure that Sucrose is the one to be the trigger. It's a pretty solid team. Where it really shines is against enemies that you can actually group with Sucrose. Next team I want to talk about is a team on which I actually already made a video. There we go. Might not get the fucking... There we go. But yeah, so this is another team that is pretty fun. Oh, why do they know? Interesting. It's a really fun team. I really like it. It's obviously incredibly situational because it has a lot of overload, and it's a team that does better in AoE than it does in single target. If you try to play it against enemies like, I mean, these guys, for example, you're gonna struggle a lot. I like it a lot. If you want to know like what to build on the units, feel free to check my video on it. I've been liking it a lot. It's really fun. And then that leaves us with one last team, I believe. Basically just the Hyperbloom teams that I've been liking a lot. There's a lot of different options that you can go for in your Hyperbloom teams. But as a general rule, when you go for something with an Electro Trigger Hyperbloom, Raiden, Keqing, and Yai are generally the best three. Personally, I like Raiden a lot more than the others because I don't really ever feel like I need the healing since I basically always placing toe in those teams. But Keqing is also good. Yai has significantly longer animation time, so she ends up having more like field time requirements. And also, her stuff only lasts for 14 seconds, so you have to swap into her twice per rotation instead of only once. So there are more restrictions on Yai, but she's still a pretty, like, she's still very functional in those teams. But yeah, well, the ones I've been liking a lot have been, you basically have your core, that's Raiden plus, or other Electro plus Dendro, and then you have a Hydro and a Flex. The Hydro I've been liking the most has generally been Qingxiao, and the Flex I've been liking the most has generally been Zhongli. But you can also go for other options. I think I'll run through this one first because it's incredibly like straightforward. You basically just set up your stuff and then you auto attack on double. Now I'm getting fucking unluckies and they decided to walk away from each other, which just really sucks. But it is what it is, I guess. Right? It happens. You can actually get okay AoE damage if they don't do that. But obviously your AoE damage is gonna fucking suck if the enemies are too far away from each other for you to actually generate seeds on both. But your single target damage is actually pretty solid, as you can see, right? And yeah, these are teams that are just pretty fun to play. You can also use Ride and Burst if you want to go for another off-field unit, but if you're building her full EM, it's just not going to do that much damage, and so I don't like it too much. But one of the other things you can go for is you can actually go for an on-field Hydro like Kokomi or Ayato instead. As long as you don't play units that affect the siege, you can basically play whatever you want. And Beidou has actually been my favorite option if you end up going for an on-field Hydro unit, because her burst, like when it bounces between enemies, doesn't actually hit the seeds. Now, obviously, against these enemies specifically, they might just decide to walk away from each other, which would be really great. We're gonna have to hope we don't get too unlucky. Oh, we didn't get too unlucky. Let's go. And, yeah, it's just really straightforward, actually. In this team specifically, I'm using Thundering Fury Ayato because it ends up giving him more uptime, the uptime that he needs to have in order to properly generate enough blooms for the team to be worth playing. It obviously means that his personal damage, like on each individual slash, isn't as high, but it also lets you get more ease, which actually kind of cancels it out, so his personal damage is mostly the same. I think that variation of the team is my favorite one, although this one is generally something I use a lot in Overworld, or more specifically, in Overworld I've been using Kole instead of Dendro main character because her Dendro application is tied to her skill and not her burst, so I don't need to make sure I get my energy back between each enemy. But yeah, I mean, I've been enjoying basically all of these teams quite a bit. I can highly recommend basically all of them. They're all fairly strong. This team, mostly ventable content, obviously. This team, honestly, it works incredibly well basically everywhere. Its biggest, like, weakness is against AoE enemies that are not groupable with Sucrose, because they are groupable with Sucrose. Like, you're basically vibing anyways. But if they're not groupable with Sucrose and you're in AoE, then most of your damage ends up not hitting multiple enemies. But even in that case, right, like I mean, I showed it, right? It still does pretty well. It's just not as ideal, whereas it's incredibly good both in single target and in AoE against groupable enemies. This is a team that's really good in AoE against non-groupable enemies, or rather against heavy enemies that don't get knocked away by overload. And it's also pretty good in single target. This, depending on the variation, can be good in a bunch of different situations. And then this is also pretty good in a bunch of different situations. You've got Keqing and Kazuha for the AoE and Fischl for the single target, and it's all pretty good. So that basically does it. When you're playing a Bloom, Hyperbloom, or Burgeon team, like the Raiden or the Razor teams, or the Sucrose team, make sure that your Dendro unit is on 4-piece Deepwood Memories because you really, really want that Dendro resistance shred. But yeah, that's basically it. Bye, YouTube. Like, how am I not able to pick this up? How did it not cancel? Bro, why did he just fucking not, like, perfect, exactly what I want.
This is just my